everybody, and welcome back to my channel After Dark Coffee and Crime. I am not feeling so well, so I'm hoping that I can do this without too much interruption with my cough and sore throat and things, but I wanted to put the information out there so that you had a podcast to listen to, just so that I can keep up with the consistency where I can. So here we go. So obviously, if you are a regular here, it is good to have you back with me and in the live chat, and I'll enjoy conversing in there and answering any questions that you may have. Or if you are new to the channel, hi and a very warm welcome. And we are growing every week, and we are a really friendly bunch, especially when a few of us are in here chit-chatting. And if you are here for the live chat and you are chatting, that's brilliant. It helps make the podcast a lot more fun when it's live as a premiere, and we can ask questions and talk about the case as the chat goes through as the podcast is aired. So in today's case, I wanted to cover this case. I came across this case while I was looking up for previous case that I've been working on, and I wanted to have a little look at this case because it's just recently finished in court, and it's a tragic case. It's a horrible case, and I stumbled across the dad of one of the two of the children that were murdered on his TikTok, and he was saying, like, because of the court case and everything, he was reliving what was going on, and I kind of felt that while it was actually sort of kind of more out there at the moment, that it would probably be a good time to do it as well. But just watching the dad on his TikTok, I just felt compelled really to tell the children's story and get that information out there for us to hear about, and just get their story out there, because it is a horrible story. So the case that I'm going to look at is called the Killamarsh Murders, and this involves the murders of 3 children and one mum of the children who was also pregnant at the same time. So as with always, I do want to just give my content warning, because there is going to be talk of murder. It was a violent murder, drug abuse, rape of a child. And for some people that may be distressing and they may not be able to watch that. So, it is true crime, and some of the topics we cover, they aren't very nice, but if I at least give some warning, if it's something that someone can't listen to, then they can come out and try, join us on the next one, and catch up with some of the older podcasts. And the case is looking at the murder of Terri Harris, who was Lacey and Johnpaul Bennett's mum, and there was another little girl involved who was Lacey's friend called Connie Gent. So like I said, if you're not able to listen to this right now, that's absolutely fine. I totally understand that. So please do switch off, and hopefully we'll get to see you on our next podcast when it's aired on the premiere, and we can chat. And again, I always like to just say that the information that I'm discussing is information that I have researched on the internet, from books, articles, if we have discoveries available, or court documents or anything like that, or if I've been able to watch hearings as we do on the American cases, then I do like to share that information, and it is for informational and educational purposes only. And so it helps me to compile the most accurate account of what's happened for you to share, and to get the victim's story out there as factual as possible. And not to cause any distress or upset to anybody that may have been involved in a similar experience, or victims of families or their friends who may see this. And I say this now because I've actually had some of my content seen by family members, and they have messaged to say that they were very thankful that my relaying of the information was accurate and respectful. So they do watch, and as I've been posting stuff on my TikTok page, I've seen family members of victims also comment on those things. So they do watch. So as I always ask, please do keep the chat respectful, because we don't know who is watching this information, and it could be someone very close to the family, or it could be someone who's been involved in something very, very similar. So today's case is a solved case, and the person who was charged with the murder has been sentenced and everything. So it's a finalised case, and it took place in a town called Killamarsh, which is a former coal mining town, which is situated in the far northern area of Derbyshire, and it has a close link on the borders with South Yorkshire. And this sort of lies near and around the city of Sheffield, and Killamarsh has actually become like an outer commuter suburb, as Sheffield has kind of grown and expanded to the south and to the east of the country as well. So it's sort of kind of bordering on a couple of areas, and obviously it's sort of somewhere in the middle there. And what actually started the incident was that the police had been sent to a property where there had been reports of disturbance, and this was at about 7:26 in the morning. And the property that they went to was a property on Chandos Crescent, and this happened on the 19th of September in 2021, so it's not even that old of a case. And this is where obviously we now go into the case. So this is where they came across Damien Bendall, who, when they met with him, had self-inflicted stab wounds, and he told the officers that he would be going to prison again. He knew that he would be, and they asked him why he thought that. So he'd kind of calmly responded with, "I've murdered 4 people." And from there, the police then entered the property, and that's when they came across the bodies of the 4 victims: Terri Harris, Johnpaul, and Lacey Bennett, and Connie Gent, who was the friend staying over. So as I like to do before I kind of get a bit more into the case, I just want to give some information about who Damien was, how he came into the lives of Terri and her children, a little bit about her, and obviously a little tiny bit about the children. Obviously they're children, and there's a lot of information we don't know because they are minors, and so that information isn't widely shared or available, and there was quite a bit of the case that hadn't been published as well. So we know that Damien had got quite a criminal history before him. He had a violent criminal background before meeting his partner and murdering her, and they actually met on a dating website, which they began this relationship back in April 2020. Bendall had, by the age of 32, had clocked up a string of troubling convictions and custodial terms that he'd been subject to going to prison for. He had been arrested and charged for an arson offence. He had been convicted of robbery back in Swindon in 2011, which he served 3 years of custody in. He had an attempted robbery and possessing a knife, again back in Swindon in 2015, again serving 3 years. He inflicted grievous bodily harm and 2 offences of assault and actual bodily harm at Plymouth, or in Plymouth should I say, for which he served 54 months of custody. He was convicted of arson in 2021, and he was made subject to a 17-month custody suspended sentence for 24 months, which allowed him to have his liberty. And sadly, this was the time frame in which he was able to meet Terri Harris, be part of her life, and end up in the situation that they ended up in, with her losing her life and obviously the children as well. So, according to friends and family, it looked like the defendant had kind of 2 personalities. They said they hit because of drugs as well. He used drugs. He gave off sort of 2 different personalities, and he would brag about fighting people, and he thought of himself as a wannabe gangster, and he had once apparently bragged about how he had killed a dog by hitting it with a brick when the owners couldn't afford to have it taken to the vet, and he bragged about that. He thought that was something that was a big deal and gave him some kind of street cred, I guess. But obviously for anyone else, especially if you were looking at a partner, a prospective partner that you had grown a relationship and a friendship with, you would run. Someone who could do that to an animal, you wouldn't want your children around them. Well, I wouldn't want my children or my animals around them. So once he'd met Terri, he began this relationship, and their friends, or her friends, described their relationship as being characterised by his drug use, and that he was violent and he was unstable, and he displayed a lot of this behaviour, and he is said to have visited her house as like a temporary visit. However, it is said that although they say it was a temporary sort of staying over when he came, it was known that he'd effectively moved in with her and the children. So during the trial, obviously his history with drugs was obviously brought out to the forefront, and he had quite a heavy drug use history, and he used to smoke cannabis every day and also use cocaine. And during September 2021, Bendall actually persuaded the probation service, while he was on the suspended prison sentence, at one time when he saw them, that he wasn't under the influence of illicit substances, and he was still taking drugs at the time. So I don't know what happened there, because I'm guessing if you are within the probation services and you are working with an ex-convict while they're out on the street, you're supposed to be monitoring this sort of stuff, and I imagine providing samples is essential, and that they get checked to make sure that they are still clean, because that would be breach of probation, and could see him back in jail. But for some unknown reason, he seems to be able to obviously persuade them that he wasn't. Terri, obviously at the time she was murdered, she was 35, and they obviously began their relationship following meeting on this dating website. I don't know what dating website it is, it didn't say, but again, they just said about their relationship, and she was also sadly in the early stages of her pregnancy. The court during the trial heard that Terri had first moved to Killamarsh in September 2020, and she at some point had moved in with her family, and during her relationship with Bendall, she had asked to borrow money from her loved ones, and that was to fund his drug habit. And the court heard how their relationship was just basically characterised by this ongoing drug abuse habit, and the violence, and how unstable he was. and she would often ask her family members, like I said, to lend her money, and she would also sell her belongings, and her family said that they witnessed this disastrous effect on her well-being, because her mum noticed that she was selling her stuff to help fund his dependent need of drugs to be filled so that he could have them. And her mum went on to say that she and Terri, they were the best friends in their mother-daughter relationship. She said that they would spend hours chatting and just being with each other in each other's company. And she described her daughter as someone who was bubbly. She said that she was a loving person and would do anything to help anybody. And she said, we were the best of friends. We enjoyed going to concerts. We enjoyed singing on the karaoke, and we used to love to go shopping, and we used to like taking the children to see wrestling and dancing on ice, and they would just enjoy each other's company. And Terri's mum said that, she was a really good mum, and she was mum to Johnpaul and Lacey Bennett. And obviously we know she was pregnant, and she would have done anything for her children, and she wouldn't have intentionally put her children into jeopardy. Her children were they were the centre of her core, and she would do anything for them. Terri's mum then went on to say that Terri was her only child, and obviously she's never going to be able to have another child. There's no one that would ever replace her daughter, and obviously these were her only grandchildren, because there was no other siblings where there would be grandchildren for them to watch grow up and love, and see them go to school and become adults. And she said that she would have given anything just to be able to spend a moment with them. However, despite concerns, obviously, Terri's mum welcomed Bendall into her home. And, mums do this. They don't necessarily always, like or agree with their children's choices of partners, and they may see things that are concerning. And often it is felt that, as a parent, you've just kind of got to watch them and support them and be there for them when these things go wrong. And she had concerns about him, but she was supporting her daughter by just supporting them in their relationship. And obviously she now has nightmares about Bendall, because she feels, I guess, from what I can make out from what's been written, that maybe there is some kind of sense of guilt there, that perhaps maybe she missed something, didn't see something, or something she could have done that would have stopped this happening. That's just from what I can sort of gauge from that statement, that the guilt is possibly there, but she couldn't have done anything. No one can foresee this. No one would foresee, their daughter's partner murdering her daughter, their daughter, or grandchildren. No one can foresee that. But I guess if you had concerns and you didn't act on them, that you can see how people can take that on and believe that it's something that they could have or should have seen and been able to stop, and it's just not anything anyone else can do about it. It's just not possible to foresee something like that. So obviously a little bit about Lacey Bennett and Johnpaul Bennett. Lacey was 11 years old at the time that she was brutally murdered, and she was known to be a happy and loving child, and she used to love raising money for charities. And actually that was one of the reasons that her and her friend were together, and because on the day she died, that's exactly what her and her friend were doing. They were out selling stuff for charity. Lacey was said to love to dance. She loved performing and enjoyed the attention of family and friends, and was a proper girly girl. And they said that she was a loving and caring person, which is very, very, very much in line with her, mum, and the relationship that her mum had with her nan. And you can see that this is characterised, and it's, she's just somebody that brought light to their lives. And at the time, her brother Johnpaul was 13, and he was said to be, he was like a real thinker, and often, boys can be, quite deep thinkers and don't express themselves that much and internalise a lot of the things. But he was described again as being thoughtful to other people, and he was an affectionate young chappie, and just was your typical teenager who loved playing on his games console. But he always kissed his nan, and would tell his nan that, he loved her, and I'm assuming that very much so was the relationship that he had with his dad as well. So you can see that they've been brought up really well. They respect each other, they have good relationships with each other, and they are respectful of other people. Connie Gent, who was obviously the friend who was staying over with Lacey, she was also just 11, and she was staying over on the previous night for a sleepover, and she was actually meant to return home on the evening that she had lost her life. But she had actually asked her mum if she could stay over another night, because they'd been out raising this money for charity, and her dad said that both of the girls were inseparable, and it was normal for them to sleep either at one house or the other, a few nights in a row. But you can see that they were children that were quite friendly, and they were quite affectionate, and they did good things for things for like charity and other people, and were just kind and affectionate children. So unfortunately, because obviously Connie had made, asked if she could stay, and made the decision that she wanted to, stay over with her friend, which why wouldn't she if it's something that, they're quite used to doing. Unfortunately, that resulted in obviously her being in the home when everything happened on that fateful night. And again, maybe her parents are kind of living with that, but why would they know that there would be no reason to even foresee something like this was going to happen? It wasn't unusual for Connie to spend extra nights there, and I can remember doing it, myself with my friends. We'd have 2 or 3 nights in a row, especially during the school holidays. So no, there is no blame. It was just unfortunate and horrific that Connie stayed there the extra night, but it's one of those things where it was a normal activity for her to do, and vice versa. So if there is any sort of, because I know, like, I think I would feel like, had I have said no to my child staying over, she would still be here, and there is no blame there at all. It's just she was staying with her friend. They'd had a nice day together. She should have gone home. She didn't want to. She wanted to spend some more time with her friend. She obviously felt very comfortable there. So obviously, the internal home, even though the relationship with Bendall and Terri wasn't a good one, obviously Connie felt safe in the home because she wanted to stay there, and often did. So it's just a tragic situation that she ended up obviously having that extra night and being in the house when this happened. So here I am going to just give you a trigger warning, because I am going to talk about what happened. I'm going to talk a little bit about the crime scene from the information that I was able to get. So if this is something that you don't want to hear, I will put a timestamp in just above, so that if you are not on the live premiere, on the replay, you can skip the section and move to the other side. But if you are on the premiere, obviously it's a good time to just avert your eyes and turn the volume down until this section has been gone through, and it won't be too long. But obviously it's hard to put a timestamp on, because obviously it's a premiere and it's living, and I don't know obviously when recording how long it's going to take. So this is your trigger warning. This isn't going to be nice, but I'm going to just go through what happened and a little bit about the scene, and no worries if you can't listen to this bit and you need to step back. So on the day of the murders, the girls and Johnpaul had spent the afternoon outside selling sweets. So John was actively helping to also help raise money for cancer research, and Connie was supposed to go home, but she didn't, as we know. She stayed, and at 9 p.m. Connie's mum sent her a WhatsApp message just to say to her, good night, and see you in the morning. And Johnpaul had sent his last text at about 9:42. I think it was to his dad. I'm not 100%, I'm 95% sure, but it was just indicating that he was going to have a shower. Now, it is possible that he might have just dropped a message to his mum while he was upstairs and mum was down, because sometimes that happens in our house. If they're gaming and they don't want to get off for that moment, sometimes that can happen. But there was a last message just indicating he was going off to have a shower. And then around the time that the children were settling to get ready for bed, Bendall is then said to have gone round in the family home to hunt his victims individually and attack them. And he did it in different rooms, and he killed them in different rooms. And that may have been on speculation. If you're thinking about trying to take on 4 people, if you can get them one by one and not all in, because I imagine trying to murder 4 people in one go, despite 3 of them being children, it'd be quite difficult to do that. So I think that the game plan may have been just to get them on their own, so that he could cause as much damage as possible without them making too much noise and alerting the other people in the house. And in order to kill them, he is said to have used a claw hammer, and he used it to hit them over the head and all on their upper bodies. The court had heard that their skulls had been smashed in, and they said that none of them had a chance at all, and that he attacked them with such ferocity into their skulls that they were smashed in. And in the case of poor Lacey, there were parts of brain matter found on the living room floor. So I can't imagine what that's like as a police officer to go in and see that. It's bad enough that there's going to have been 4 deceased victims, 3 of which are children, to see them beaten in such a way that there is brain matter on the floor. It is also said that all of the victims had defensive injuries, indicating that they had each tried to fight Bendall off of them. Somewhere from when he had finished the attacks and 5 a.m. in the morning, he also went on to rape 11-year-old Lacey as she was dying. So she hadn't passed away, she was still alive, fighting obviously to stay alive, even though she had her brain and skull smashed. he went on to assault her, and it was then said that Terri and Lacey's bodies were actually found in the master bedrooms in the same room, and that John had been killed in the bathroom. I'm assuming because he had gone to shower, and that poor Connie was found in a different room. And despite obviously having carried out these atrocious crimes on the children and on Terri, he is then said to have about approximately 10:30 been trying to contact a drug dealer to be able to obviously get his hands on his drugs. And it was also said that at about 10 to 11 a call was made by Terri Harris's phone to Lacey's phone, and it said that it was believed to be because he was trying to locate all of the devices in the home. So he'd thought that bit out, obviously to plan in that detail to find out, where the phones were. Now I don't know whether that was to try and get the phones, hide them, or I don't know whether it was prior to the death, because obviously we know when they last had contact on their own phones, which was when the text went out from Johnpaul and Connie, whether this was to find out what rooms they were in or whether it was to actually take the phones and delete them. I'm not entirely sure, but he went as far as to use Terri's phone to be able to locate them. So after he had then killed the victims, he then gets a taxi to Sheffield, and he does this to exchange Johnpaul's games console for more drugs, and then he returned back to Killamarsh. He then contacts his mum in the morning, and this then led to the police being called at 7:38 a.m. and actually Bendall had called 999 himself, and he'd said that he'd killed 4 people and he had stabbed himself. And he makes this call, and officers come to the property because his mum also called the police. And when they arrive, he just is so blasé about it. Now he may have obviously then had the drugs in his system that he will have taken, so he may not have been in much pain with the self-inflicted injuries, but he said to the police when they arrived that the whole house was covered in claret. I used a hammer. Obviously I'm going to prison as I murdered 4 people. And he also then said, I bet you don't get 4 murders in Killamarsh, do you? Now, a police body cam footage captures this moment when he informs the police outside that he's killed the 4 people. So I'm just going to link that up there.
Basically, I need the police and the ambulance and that, because I've killed 4 people.
Okay, just hold the line. Bear with me.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Alright, come to me.
Right.
Mate, have you got anything on you that you shouldn't have?
No, there's no weapons or nothing.
Right.
Do you just want to undo your coat? Have you armed yourself?
Yeah.
You have?
Have you stabbed yourself, mate?
I can see blood on your hands.
Yeah.
Anywhere else?
Just my chest, 4 inches in with a bread knife.
Can we have a look?
Yeah, and one on the stomach. I bled quite.
Alright, do you want to
yeah. Can we go down
no, just stay there.
I just don't want to be in front of everyone.
Alright, just go on the corner.
Just walking wounded at the minute.
Alright, stand here. Stay here.
Right,
So,
we're told, I know what's going to happen to you now, mate.
Well, I know it's going to happen
just
when you go to prison, obviously, again.
Why, what have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
Yeah.
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
He's been calm and compliant, but he's got some stab wounds to his chest. They're not oozing blood, but he's saying that his family are inside and that he believes he has murdered them.
Do you want to go?
Are you alright for me to go in?
and one of the police officers was a bit skeptical because it was a bit, it was a bit of an odd thing that some guy is just saying he's killed 4 people, and so blasé about it. I mean, from what I've seen in videos, in TikToks, 999 and 911 calls, some of these people, when they call in to call in a murder, they are very blasé about it, like it's just a normal day, it's just a normal activity, and they've committed this crime, and they're just confessing on the phone, and they are so calm about it. So I guess you don't see it much, but when you do see it, and if you've never seen it before, you're going to be skeptical. I've just killed 4 people, there's claret all over the house, and I know that he makes reference to killing 5 people, if you count the baby that his missus was carrying. He also went on and said that. So they arrived to the property and they've caught on camera his confession. One of the officers is a bit like skeptical, and I did actually ask if he had any mental health issues. He was found outside of the house, and he had self-inflicted stab wounds in his chest and stomach from a bread knife that he'd used. So I don't know whether or not he did it to try and end his life before he got caught, or he just did it to self-harm, but obviously it wasn't enough to cause him enough injury that he was unconscious or anything, and obviously sadly not enough suffering. I know I shouldn't say that, but in this case I feel that he is just a horrible person who did horrible things, and if anyone deserved to suffer, it would be him. So he says that, that he's going to be going to prison, and again, calmly, he says again that he's murdered 4 people because they ask why he thinks that, and it's very repetitive sometimes when you're listening to the 911 calls or watching footage, because they often repeat these things so that they have it documented, more than once that they've confessed to something, and how they address things, and it's very clever why they do these things, but it is how they do things. And at first you're like, why are you asking that? You listen to the calls and you're like, why are you asking that again? They've just told you that. And it's actually so that they can get the confession said and repeated. And sometimes as well, but they're like, some people are a bit taken back and a bit like to say, you did what now? Because for some people, they've never heard someone just outwardly confess, and it throws you. So there is a reason why it seems quite repetitive that he's repeating that he's murdered 4 people, and that they're asking him why they think that he's going to prison and stuff. So after that, officers then go into the property, and they are then come up with in front of the remains of the 3 children and 1 adult inside the house. When they go inside the house, there's a police officer called PC Stubbs, and he describes being totally unprepared for what he was to find, and the horror and the disbelief at what he saw when he went from each room into the next, and seeing the victims. He was in shock, and you don't expect to see something of that velocity in that that horrible in front of you when you walk into a crime scene. I mean, you expect a crime scene, and they've seen crime scenes, but he was really unprepared for obviously what he saw. Bendall also told the police that he had consumed 3 to 4 bags of cocaine and had then blacked out. So he's kind of trying to backtrack a little bit there, and again, that's why sometimes you hear things being repeatedly asked, because when they sound as clear as day when they initially come into contact with the police, and then they start backtracking, they've got evidence that they've said X, Y and Z before they obviously realise the severity, like, because he may not have realised the severity until it could be the drugs he was on as well, but they can start to try to backpedal, so everything they do has a reason. So the police go in and they find Johnpaul in the bathroom naked, and then they find Terri Harris and Lacey Bennett in the master bedroom, and then Connie was found in a separate bedroom. And I don't know whether or not Connie was clothed or unclothed, and I don't know any information on Terri Harris either. A lot of the court information was actually sealed. I don't know whether it was because there was minors, but there was also a delay in the hearing, and we didn't know why initially that this was because he had wanted to lessen the charge from murder to manslaughter, and so he then tried to delay the proceedings because he wanted to be declared as unfit to stand trial, and that was revealed later, but it wasn't able to be revealed at the time that it was going through. So there was a delay in the trial, and obviously at that point as well, COVID was around. Forensic experts were not able to determine in the order in which he attacked the family and Connie, but they concluded that Lacey had definitely been moved from her original place of where she had been attacked in the living room up into the master bedroom, and it was said during the hearing that there was a very strong inference that Bendall had raped Lacey in the living room as well as in the bedroom, suggesting that she had obviously been raped twice by him. He was arrested at the scene, and because obviously he had injured himself, which could have been why he injured himself, he was taken to the hospital to obviously check his injuries prior to obviously taking them down to the Derbyshire police station. And during the interview after his arrest, he describes coldly what he did, and he says the whole house was covered in claret and I used a hammer, and then he said I didn't realise what I did until I walked in the room and I saw my missus and my daughter, and he was then charged with murder in September of 2021, and then the charge of rape was added to the indictment in the November after they had got the forensic evidence. So he's kind of like, during that interview, like being cold and describing what he's done, and then he sort of kind of little backpedal there. I didn't realise what I did until I walked in the room and saw what I had done, and and obviously he must realise the severity of what's going on, and that's obviously why he tried to go for manslaughter and not murder. And from what I've seen on social media, a lot of people have said he liked the notoriety that this gave him. So one of the reasons why I just call him by his surname and not call him by his full name is I don't really want to give him the notoriety, because what he did was cold and evil, and no family should lose their grandchildren and daughter, and no dad should lose his children at the hands of a cold-blooded murderer. And Bendall obviously was arrested and charged, and as I said, the trial was postponed originally, and it wasn't for legal reasons released at the time, but obviously, as I said, it came to light that the postponement was because he'd engaged in this lengthy exercise to find an expert willing to declare him unfit to stand trial to lessen his charges, and he originally tried to admit to manslaughter, and then he pleaded not guilty to murder but guilty to manslaughter, so it was a bit here, there and everywhere. And he then also at the time pleaded not guilty to raping Lacey during the horrific incident in Killamarsh, but he ended up entering his plea in the Derby Crown Court in the November, and then he then admitted to raping Lacey, even though he'd previously denied it, and I believe that is because of the forensic evidence that they had. He couldn't obviously deny that, and perhaps maybe, you know, when they're trying to lessen any prison sentencing or shorten their time, any sort of kind of admittance, he may have been hoping that that could reduce his sentence. But in October, just gone, he pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Lacey and John and Connie and Terri, and as a result, obviously, the court proceedings came to a close. He was found guilty, and he was given a very hefty sentence, and I totally agree with this sentence. The judge presiding the case said, "You are now 32 and you have a significant background of violent offending. In April 2020, you began a relationship with Terri Harris. You became abusive, controlling and distancing Terri from her family. And then on September the 18th, you carried out these brutal and vicious assaults on a defenceless woman and 3 children." He went on to say, "You attacked Lacey downstairs and carried her upstairs, where you raped her on the bed where her mother had been killed as her life ebbed away." And following the hearing of Bendall's plea, the High Court judge, Mr. Justice Sweeney, sentenced him to a whole life order. And this was for each charge of murder. So there's 4 counts of murder and 1 of rape. And he said, you know, it is accepted that the seriousness of your offences is so exceptionally high that this court must make this a whole life order. And I agree, a whole life order in this case is a must. He must serve his punishment, and he must serve every single year that the criminal justice system has given him. So it's not very often that this happens. He will spend the rest of his life in prison with no minimum end term and no chance of early release. This doesn't happen very much at all in the UK. And I'll go through a bit more of that at the end. But in a victim impact statement, which was read to the court from Lacey and Johnpaul's dad, Jason Bennett, he said, "The murder of my children has destroyed and taken my life away." And Charles Gent, Connie's dad, said in his statement, "The murder of my daughter Connie has completely torn my life apart, and I feel like I'm a lost soul trying to navigate my way through life without her here." Angela Smith, Mrs. Harris' mum, or Terri Harris's mum, described her in a statement, and Lacey and John, and she said Lacey and John would occasionally say to her that they were scared of monsters, and that she would tell them that there were no such thing as monsters. And she said, "How wrong was I?" How chilling is that? How wrong was I? In the past, as I said, whole life tariffs are rare, and as a result of obviously the crimes and obviously the impact statements have been heard, and they will have been in more detail, but I just took the basic out of there, just so you could hear a little bit about what families said. But whole life tariffs are rare, and in the past it was up to the Home Secretary to actually issue a whole life tariff, which was introduced in 1983. But now, today, they are judged by judges, and according to the government, there are now more than 60 criminals currently serving whole life orders in the UK. So when you think about how many people are in prison, 60 plus is not a huge amount of people. And so Bendall actually joins a string of some of the most dangerous offenders who have also been given life prison terms, meaning that they'll also die behind bars. And there's, like I said, not that many, but they're in terms of the general population of prison, but criminals that have been handed down these punishments who have also died in prison include serial killers like Carol Chipman, Ian Brady, Pete Sutcliffe, and some of the most notorious killers who are currently alive and serving prison sentences include Harvey Ali, 26, and Ali is the terrorist who stabbed the MP to death at the constituency surgery. And then there's the triple killer Anthony Russell, who was handed a whole life prison tariff in the March for the brutal murders of a mother, son and a pregnant woman. And then there's Ian Stewart, who was convicted of murdering his first wife 6 years before he went on to murder his fiancée, the children's book author Helen Bailey. Double murderer David Fuller, who was sent down for life, and it had then recently emerged that he had sexually abused more than 100 dead women and girls in hospital mortuaries, and that will be a case that I will cover. We know about Wayne Couzens, who I covered a couple of weeks ago, who was handed a whole life prison sentence for killing 33-year-old Sarah Everard. Reading, the terrorist attacker Kari Sordala murdered 3 men in a park in a knife attack and was heard shouting Anu Akbar, and he had fatally stabbed friends James Furlong, 36, David Wallace, 49, and Joseph Ritchie Bennett, 39. There's Salford hitman Mark Fellows, known as the Iceman, responsible for the murders of John Kinsella and Paul Macy. And Macy, who was 55, was branded Salford's Mr. Big and was murdered by Fellows outside of his home. Stephen Port was dubbed the Grinder Killer, and that's because of his crimes. And he had killed young gay men. Labour MP Jo Cox was stabbed 15 times and shot 3 times outside of her constituency. It's a word I struggle. In Birstall near Leeds, and it is the neo-Nazi Thomas Mayer who shouted Britain first in the attack, and he was given a whole life sentence for her murder. Fuzzilia Lee Rigby was brutally murdered on the streets of Woolwich in South East London. Muslim converts Michael Aid Bowell and Michael Aid Bajal ran over the 25-year-old soldier close to the barracks before they stabbed him in broad daylight back in 2013. Police Constable Fiona Bone, 32, and Nicola Hughes, 23, so very young, were both killed in the line of duty in the September of 2012. Dale Cregan murdered the officers in a gun and grenade attack as they had responded to a burglary in Tameside. Levi Belfield, he's another serial killer who's well known. He was handed 2 whole life orders and jailed in 2008 for the murders of 22-year-old Amelie Delarange and the murder of Marsha McDonnell. After these 2 cases were then linked. Stephen Wright was dubbed the Suffolk Strangler or the Ipswich Ripper for his crimes, and he served or serving life imprisonment for killing 5 sex workers in the final months of 2006. So as you can see, there's not a huge amount of life-term killers in jail that will never see the light of day. There are some, and I think it's good because it's showing progress within our justice system, because our justice system really isn't the best, I have to say, in terms of how the USA system runs. And when I read cases like this and hear what happened to those poor children, it makes me want the death penalty for someone like that, because they don't deserve to have their own own life, and over here prison is not so much a crime. I've heard of people commit crimes, minor crimes, to get put into prison because they get education, they get their 3 meals a day, and they get, pool tables and stuff like that. So I've never been to prison, so I don't know if that's true, but it's just the things that you hear on the street of what goes on in prisons, and I can believe it. So for some people it's probably the better option, but yeah, our system is getting better, and I don't think we'll ever see the death penalty again, but I think in cases like this, something like that, the death penalty is definitely something that I would have up for discussion, and I know lots of people feel very differently about that, and that's okay, because we can all have our opinion, we can all have our views. Nothing is wrong, nothing is right, but I am glad that this man will never see outside of prison. And following that, the Secretary of State asked the Chief Inspector of Probation to conduct a review, because Bendall was indeed on probation at the time of his offences, and they wanted a review because, is this something that they had mismanaged, and had they have managed this better, would this have been prevented? And the inspectorate could not publish the review report due to the ongoing court proceedings, and it is now being prepared for publication in this year of 2023, sometime early within this year. So when I get that information, I'll be interested to see what the result of that is, because again, like I said, he was on probation, and he had told the probation that he wasn't on drugs, and they believed him, so it'll be interesting to see the result of that. So that is all on the cover of the Killamarsh Murders. It was a terrible and brutal case. There wasn't a huge amount of information out there, so I've pulled together everything I could to give you some of the information, something that maybe you've heard before, something that perhaps you weren't aware of. You may not have even been aware of the case. Lacey and Johnpaul's dad is on TikTok, and that's where some of the footage cut I managed to get to pop in the video here of the children at Christmas, and he's on there. Give his TikTok a look, and you'll get to see some of the memories and how he's feeling post obviously what has happened. He talks about how he's coping and his thoughts, and how the roller coaster of a ride that he's been on obviously since this, and it seemed to have landed onto my TikTok page, so I now follow him because he's an inspiration. He's keeping going when he didn't want to. He's lost his world, and he's still out there, he's still fighting to be here. So yeah, give him a little look. I will get the link for his dad's TikTok, and I'll put it in here because it's not under his name, it's under a different name, but I will put that in so you can have a little follow of him and show him some support. And this is one of the ones where I had a relative comment on my TikTok when I posted the arrest on my TikTok. One of the cousins messaged on there and said this is my family, so they are watching. So that is all for today on this case. It wasn't a nice case, it was hard, but I'm glad to have been able to cover it and share this information and tell their story. Babies were stolen, an unborn baby was tragically stolen from grandparents as well. There's a lot of people that are left behind who are dealing with the case, but if you've got any questions, like I said, pop them in the comments and I'll happily go through them. Or if you know something about the case and you want to add some comments that perhaps maybe I've missed, please do pop them in there. But I will look forward to catching up with you all on the next case, so I will say goodbye for now. Bye everybody.
just thought I'd share this because I'm sure so many people it must happen to them. It's got to. So 2 days ago, I was just such a dark day, sad, solo, man flu as well. So that didn't help. And you just need that hope to come along and rescue you, give you another reason, give you a reason to carry on. I went to bed and I was having this dream, but it was so real. I needed to get hold of my kids. I needed to see them. I'm missing them like crazy. In this dream, I could hear John's voice, but I couldn't see him. Then I could hear Lacey's voice, but I couldn't see him. I went, 1 minute, let me try again. I need to see you. So then I tried it again, reaching out to him. And then I could see John's face. It was like it's distorted and it kept breaking up. And I'm like, I can't get to you. I can't see you. I can't play. I said, I'll try it again. And then I tried it again. And it was just amazing. I was in a room with him. It was real to me. It still feels real now, and I'm taking that. I was in a room, I could smell him. I could hear him breathing. I could touch the faces. I kissed the faces. They were laughing at me. And I told them I love them and how much I miss them. And they said they love me back. You know, to me, I'm taking that as a sign, and they are here with me. I've got to. Someone else gets signs. I believe in them. But what picked me up for that day, I woke up as if I had seen them. What picked me up.